vineyards will again be bought in this land. In 588 BC, during the siege of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, Jeremiah found himself in prison by his own king for what would be in today's terms maybe called insurrection and treason. And for years, Jeremiah had been telling the king about the catastrophe that was on his doorstep, that was coming because God was not pleased with the way that he was leading the people of God, and the way that Zedekiah, who was the king over the temple in Jerusalem and all of the people, so both the politics, the political, and the religious orders, how he was abandoning the true worship of the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and going out and worshiping other gods. They have been taken captive, and if they haven't been taken captive, they've been influenced by all these foreign countries that have come into their land off and on. Jerusalem was on a major crossways anyway. It was well-traveled city, and a lot of influences came through that city, and oftentimes people would stray one way or the other. God has spoken and has said that God is not pleased with the people for going out. And in this note of bravado, perhaps, is what I liken. Jeremiah would tell the king what Israel, the whole country, the whole people needed to do to avoid catastrophe. Turn from their ways, return to the God who gave them the land in the first place. Know your history, Jeremiah might say. Understand that the prophets were hired by the kings to toe the royal line. And Jeremiah wasn't doing that. And like the old Hank Williams song, he's in the jailhouse now. Picture of two personalities. One gets a little bit of press, the other one's a lot. Hanamel, Jeremiah's cousin. He can see the proverbial writing on the wall as he looks over the hills and over the mountains and sees that the Babylonians will one day indeed overrun the countryside. Hanamel's a slick guy, I think. He's a great salesman. He's willing to sell a piece of property that would have no more worth during the occupation than a dry well would have to a camel. And he's found a sucker in his cousin Jeremiah, who indeed goes out and buys the land. Besides, it was Jeremiah's obligation to do that. Even from a jail cell, he can do that. The text goes into great detail about the process, and in the end, Jeremiah has his property, he has the deeds, the private one that goes in the lockbox in the bank, and the public one that goes down and is stamped in the probate and taken care of down in the RNC office or the local county office there. And Hanamel is on his way. He's got his money, he's got his shekels, he's on his way out of town. He's out from underneath the responsibility of this piece of property, from the probable doom that is coming on it. Not making a lot on the sale, but probably not losing anything as well. He takes his money and gathers his possessions and is gone. And then there's Jeremiah, the prophet of Israel, who against all popular votes believes that the time will come, it will come to pass, and God's people, even in the midst of their catastrophe, impending doom, it seems like, will flourish. He's pretty realistic in his words. This is the way it is, folks, he says. Our world is on the brink of destruction. We're going into exile because the leadership has stumbled and led us astray, and let the widows and the orphans suffer, and the sick and the struggling suffer, and the children go without food, all while their leaders sit and argue about whether Jordanian or Canaanite dates make the best jellies and jams, and who gets to sit at the head table at the state official dinners or in the cabinet room. But we're coming back again, he says. Houses and fields and vineyards will once again be bought here. So he buys a field. It's an act of subversive defiance. When you're about to be overrun, the last thing you want to do is invest in property unless you know something. And Jeremiah knew something. With the Babylonians at the gate, nobody believed him. But you had to give him that E for effort. Because buying that field was an act of courage. To Hannibal, one who sold it, and the masses, it wasn't a time to have courage. It was a time to panic. It was a time to doubt that there would ever be a future for our family, our extended family, our friends' families, for our nation. It was a time to maybe think about circling the wagons and keep what little we have safe. Hide what we have so it wouldn't be taken from us in our captivity. What Jeremiah poses is a different kind of life, a life of radical hope. Not a life filled with fluff, but a life that is committed to action, a reorienting of life that allows us to see the tasks ahead of us that need to be taken care of, a life that allows us to see the vision ahead of us that we will live into. And that's what he meant by that last text. One day, houses and farms and fields and vineyards will again occupy this place. I wonder how many people he spoke to could see that. I wonder how many of us can see that. Beyond where we are today, a reorienting of our thought, of our vision, to look forward rather than to look at all the destruction that is going on around us in our social fabric, in our political systems, in our world that seems to be just cracking, along these fissures and coming apart, and we don't know what's going to happen. But Jeremiah steps into that and says, one day, houses and farms and fields and vineyards will again thrive here. Maybe it's to this congregation or this community. To each of us here, a life like that, folks, it can change the world. It did, and it can do so again. This is not a time to despair and to wring our hands. It's not a time to worry about what might happen, because it probably will. It's not a time to think about all the bad things out there and how can we work now to fix it so that we can hold on to what we have right now. It's a time not to trust in our own understanding, but to trust in God. It's a time not to sit back and cautiously watch and wait, but a time to pray and act boldly as people of faith with strong faith. Invest in and prepare for that time. Invest in and prepare the ground in which we walk for the future that God has for us at Seneca Presbyterian Church. My challenge to this congregation has always been to move forward. Let's pray and act with strong faith. And let's show this community around us that God's Spirit is alive and well in Seneca and Seneca Presbyterian Church. The word's getting out there, folks. It is getting out there. I'm never a big one for social media, but it's doing wonderful. Sean, by the way, is on a well-deserved vacation today. All his work. Our individual and corporate future is not, sort of against our Presbyterian understandings, is not predetermined. What we do with this time right now that we've been given, that we have in our midst, is what matters. How do we continue our ministry to this community? How do we move ahead in what we are about in this life? What Jeremiah did was to dare to believe that something better was in the making. All you have to do is click on a news item in today's world, click on a link in a feed on some website, and you can just get sucked in to the reality that there's not much better happening. And it's into that reality that Jeremiah steps in and says, I believe that there is something better in the making. It's as if he were saying, this is not the time to despair in our personal life, in our corporate life, in our congregational and friend life as a people of faith. It's not a time to wring our hands and to wonder what all this is coming to. People ask me a lot, what do you think is going to happen? What's going to happen down the road? This is a time to hope. Somebody said that Jeremiah's hope isn't in hope, as in the power of positive thinking, the Pollyanna story. Oh, I hope it really does this. But his hope is solidly in the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and of Israel and of you and of me. And that's where the proverbial rubber meets the road. If we were to have an opportunity to write the future of this church, of this congregation, what would it be? I ask that sometimes in small groups when I'm invited to go to a church, particularly with sessions, who are wondering what their future is going to be like. I ask them, if you were to write the future of this congregation, what would it be? If your first reaction is less than positive, then you're a realist. We look around, we see that we are no longer the dominant social factor in life anymore. People don't go to church anymore. There are other things that compete for our time and for our attention and for our dollars even. If you think that church is a mainstay in the culture around us, it's not anymore. Our response might be either to deny the situation that's around us, put the blinders on, and go on with the ship singing hymns like on the Titanic, or find some warped pleasure in it. See, I told you so. It's hard to hear Jeremiah through the clanging and the banging of our fears and doubts and despairs. But we have been here before. Jeremiah records that. And we've seen some worse, actually. How could it be worse, Jim? My goodness. The horrors of Good Friday were overcome by the sheer joy of Easter. The horror of Good Friday was overcome by joy of Easter Sunday. That's why we've been here before. A failed mission, the end of a movement, became God's way of giving life to all people. Jeremiah didn't see death in the Babylonian captivity that was on their doorstep. He saw life. And he invested in the future of that life by going out and buying his cousin's field, because he knew that houses and fields and vineyards would again be planted and grown and built in that place. Paul Greer is a friend of mine in Greenville, and he is recently retired from the Presbyterian Foundation, which is the vehicle that carries billions of money, actually, that helps churches large and small accomplish their missions around the United States. Paul told the story one time about his grandmother, his upstate New York State grandmother, who was a bit of a stickler for doing it right and being able to get everything down pat, and things that would kind of throw her curveballs she didn't quite know what to do with. Her husband's college roommate had a piece of property, they had a piece of property that was a piece of farmland that they were wondering what to do with, and they didn't know whether to sell it or whether to keep it, and she wanted to keep it, and he wanted to sell it. It wasn't doing anybody any good. And she put up a fight, Paul says, to hang on to that piece of property. It had been in their family for a very, very, very long time. But her husband knew that it was time to look beyond that piece of property. So he sold it to his college roommate, whose name was Thomas Watson III, whose grandfather, Thomas Watson Sr., started IBM. They also had a piece of property that wouldn't grow dirt, Paul said, much less anything else. He wanted to keep it. She evidently learned a lesson. She wanted to sell it. She won that battle, and they sold it to a Walmart distribution center. If we can be a people who can hear Jeremiah, who can hear Jesus, who can hear God in our midst saying, look out there, not right here, who can be a people who don't look at the reality of the situation. We've got to save this, we've got to do that, we've got to protect that, and throw up our hands in despair, but who can see the possibility of life among the challenges that life throws our way, then perhaps we can invest in this place. We can prepare the ground for that future that God has for us. Because our future is not predetermined. Not by us, not by our society at all. And what we do with this time that we have matters. For those who have ears to hear this morning, hear. Let us pray.